So on top of dealing with 10 years of ankle problems, I also dealt with a lot of hamstring and groin and hip flexor strains in that same leg. And I always had a suspicion that there was something that was linking the two, whether it was one thing that was causing both, or the ankle was causing the hamstring and hip and groin. But I could never really figure out what it was. And it took me a really long time to figure out that they were hip deficiencies. So I had problems at my hip that were causing, at least partially, the ankle issues and the problems I was having with my hamstring and groin and everything else. So today I want to explain to you, like I would have wanted it explained to me 10 years ago to prevent all of this from happening, what I had going on at the hip and what I see with a lot of other people, because I've worked with lots and lots and lots of people with ankle problems, and basically every single one of them also has an issue with the hip. So the question can be, do hip problems cause ankle issues? Do ankle issues cause hip problems? And the answer is I really don't care, because it's not like we can only train one of these. We can train both of them at the same time, and as long as we clear up the problem, I really don't care what was causing it if we fix both of them. Today though is gonna be just about the hip, so let's get into it. And the two biggest things that I see people missing are, number one, the ability to internally rotate at the hip. So it's a big word. What does it mean? Basically, it just means if you're sitting down, your ability to rotate your foot outwards. And you might think that seems like external rotation because your foot's going out. But internal rotation is because if we look at your thigh and there was an arrow pointing straight up, I'm rotating that arrow towards the center line of my body. So it's rotating inwards. It just means that the foot is going to go outwards. And the second one is, you could look at it two ways. It's either the ability to shift the hips up and down, or you could also look at it as going side to side. But we can also look at this when we're standing, and I'll explain why all these movements are important, but we first need to understand what they are. So if you're standing, internal rotation would still look like that. But we can also look at it in terms of not our leg moving, but everything else moving around our leg. So this would be external rotation, and this is internal rotation. So I'm in the same position that if I were to just twist my leg, but I just moved everything else around this leg, which is important because that happens when we walk, and we need this ability to be able to shift this hip forward and internally rotate this back leg if we want to walk properly. So what I want to do here is I want to give you 3 exercises to work on these 2 characteristics or 2 qualities that we should have that oftentimes we lose. And as you go through these, one thing I think is important to know is that a lot of times you'll feel one side that feels really smooth and buttery and feels like things are working correctly. Then you'll have one side that is not so smooth, feels a little bit weird, things don't feel like they're activating right. That's a really helpful thing to have, because you can understand that this side that feels smooth, feels mobile, feels buttery, is what we want it to feel like on the other side. So you can use that feeling and you can try and replicate it on the other side. But I'm gonna give you 3 exercises to help improve on this, and then I'll give you 1 more bonus exercise at the end. It's a little bit less of a hip exercise, but it's still a really beneficial thing. So the first exercise is just a hip hike. So there's a whole bunch of ways to do it. I'm gonna show you a couple different ones, but my favorite way to do it is with a yoga ball like this. This one should be inflated a little bit more, but all you're gonna do is you're gonna put it up against the wall right on your hip. And from this point, you're going to take this left foot off the ground and you're gonna push into the yoga ball here. From this position, and I like to do it, you could change up your foot positions, but at first, just put your foot straight forward. Here, I'm going to try and keep everything square, so I'm not twisting at all. And I'm just going to try and get this hip down as far as possible, and then get this hip up as far as possible. And I'm trying to really think about not just moving up and down, but also pushing in to the ball. So I'm trying to keep pressure on the ball, while also trying to get that hip as high and as low as possible, while constantly pushing into the wall. But you don't have to have a yoga ball. You can also do it, and you don't have to go buy a yoga ball. You could use a soccer ball. It's not gonna work quite as well. You probably want to inflate yours a little bit more than mine. But it'll work, and you can also do it just off of the edge of a step. So you can come here, and you're not gonna get that sort of lateral push so much, but I'm trying to bring this hip down as low as possible, and then get it up as high as possible. And then you can also make it more of a dynamic movement off the edge of a box. And then you're really trying to come down. And then as you hit the box, hip comes up. So that's a hip hike. It's really, really good for working on this ability to hip drop and come up with the hip. Really good for that lateral hip. And we can also, one more point that we can do here is that, especially when we're doing it on the wall, you can change your foot position. So you can get into a more internally rotated position by pointing your whole leg inwards, not just the toes, your whole leg inwards. So your knee needs to point in as well. And from here, you can do the same thing and do your hip hikes. You can do one set in the middle, and then you can do one set with your leg pointing out as well. Really helpful exercise, and let's see exercise number 2 now. So exercise number 2, what we're gonna do is an internally rotated hinge. So not a great name for it, but it describes what we're doing. So you can use heel elevation for this, or you can do it on flat ground. You can do it double leg, you can do it single leg. I'm gonna demonstrate it double leg on the heel elevation, because I think it can be helpful. But basically what we're gonna do here is you're just hinging. So there's gonna be basically no movement at your upper body and no movement at your lower body. All you're doing is bending at the waist and coming forward. And from here, the difference though is that you're going to try and internally rotate both your legs as you come back. What you should feel is a really big stretch in the glutes, because one of the things that the glutes will actually do is externally rotate your leg. So as we are shifting the hips back, we're lengthening the glutes, and as we are bringing our knees in, we're also lengthening the glutes. And there's some downstream effects of the ankles as well. It's gonna help with pronation, it's gonna help with just the ability to get weight to the right parts of the foot, a whole bunch of different things. Because pronation is not a bad thing. Pronation has to happen, and it's going to help you pronate. And if you want to get into a little more pronated position, you can do it on the flat ground. And you're just hinging back, pulling the knees inwards, twisting the whole leg, and keeping the feet straight forward. And then coming up, and you should feel a really strong contraction in your glutes. So if you've ever heard that, oh, your glutes aren't working, your glutes aren't firing, one of the things that if you want your glutes to fire, you have to be able to put length into them first. So if you imagine, if my arm was totally straight and somebody said flex your tricep, I would be like, I can't. There's no length for me to contract out of. So if your glutes are constantly contracted, there's no way you're gonna be able to get your glutes to work. So part of the reason for some people is that you have to be able to lengthen the glutes first, and then you can contract them. So the most length we can possibly put into the glutes is with something like this internally rotated hinge, where we're lengthening through the 2 ways that the glutes lengthen, through internal rotation and through a hinge or hip flexion, as we call it. So I'll show you from the side. It's a really simple exercise, and you can start to add load to this if you want, but we're here. I'm thinking rotate the whole legs inward. I'm shifting back, and then from here, strong glute contraction out of it. That's exercise number 2. Let's look at 3. So the third exercise is one that I got from the good people over at David Gray Rehab. I don't know that they were the first people to do this, but they're who I saw it from, so I thought I'd give them some credit. Basically what this is I call it the rotational hinge. I don't know what they call it, but the idea here is that you're going to set up with the cable machine, and you could do this with bands as well, but you need some sort of resistance that can pull you across your body. So it's gonna be kind of hard with dumbbells, but bands will work. From this position, you're going to set up on your leg that is closest to the cable machine, and then you can put your back leg down, but just for balance. From here, you're going to do a hinge in a similar way to we did the hinge with the internally rotated hinges. You're gonna shift your hips back, but you're also gonna allow this cable machine to pull you across. And you're gonna feel a really, really big stretch in this hip on this side that's closest to the cable machine. Then from here, you're gonna pull through with the glute, and then you're gonna pull across your body. So I'm just thinking about, can I shift this hip back and then let the cable machine rotate me across, and then come forward with the hip and pull a little bit across. So it's not just this rotation, this hinge down. We're also getting this rotation here, and then we pull up across. So really, really good. At the beginning, I really felt this in that sort of insertional where my hamstring and my glute meet. There was some tightness there was some stiffness there, so some different things going on. And I was way, way tighter on the side that had the ankle problems and the side that wasn't. So this one is working both that ability to drop the hip, but also the ability to rotate and put length into the glute. So this is super helpful. I really enjoy this exercise, and I have a lot of people that really like it as well. But let's hop over into the bonus exercise now. So for the bonus exercise, and I only call it a bonus exercise because it's not so much of a hip exercise, it's more of a hamstring knee sort of exercise. But one of the things that will happen is that you have different hamstring muscles. You have muscles on the outside of the hamstring, you have muscles on the inside of the hamstring. They're all hamstrings, but they're different muscles. And sometimes they can kind of turn off, and not that they're not working, but they're not working as hard as they should be. And we've seen studies that the way that your toes point on a leg curl will change the activation in these different muscles. So one of the things is I dealt with a lot of hamstring sort of strains on the inside of my hamstring, kind of in a point where it's hard to tell if it's hamstring or if it's groin. And that was generally because I wasn't super strong there, and also because it wasn't working very well. And when I would try to train my hamstrings as a whole, these sort of outer hamstrings would turn on way more than any other hamstring. So I prefer to do this in a hamstring curl machine, either a lying or a seated or a standing or a kneeling or any of the hamstring curl machines. But I don't have mine, so I'm using a band. But what we can do is that we can play with the foot position, and I first heard about this through some of the Poliquin guys, and there's research on it as well that probably came before that, but that's where I heard it from again. So what I would do here is that I'm going to point my toes inwards. And it's important to notice that it's not just pointing the toes inwards, it's rotating my whole shin inwards. So I'm not so focused on where the toe is pointing as much as if you feel this bone in the front of your shin, getting that to point inwards. So from that position, I'm gonna try and keep that there, and I'm just doing hamstring curls like this. And then I like to do them for really high reps. You'll get a lot of activation in that inner hamstring. But the other thing is that some people aren't actually necessarily super weak in their inner hamstrings. Some people need outer hamstrings. But they're sort of like reins on a horse. They pull the knee and they help stabilize the knee in different directions. So we need them to be able to both work properly. One of the ways you can test this is if you do a set of 6, 8, 10 hamstring curls to failure and you have somebody else watch you or you film it and you watch where at the end of the set your toes are pointing, it's going to give you a pretty decent idea of what part of your hamstring is weak. So if you are doing your curls and then you end up with your toes pointing outwards, trying to grind out those last couple of reps, you're probably fairly weak in that inner hamstring and you might need more of this and more internally rotated hamstring strength, or you might be in the opposite boat. But this can be really helpful for stabilizing the knee, getting your hips into the correct position and sort of preventing some of those hamstringy, groiny sort of strains. So hopefully that was helpful. It definitely would have been helpful for me 10 years ago, and that's why I made this. So I'm not the only person who's ever had these issues, so I would imagine this is going to be helpful for at least someone. But if you want to hop on a call with me and run through and see what's going on with you, you can join my community down below. I'm doing free assessment calls for the next couple of days. Be quick because they do fill up. That'll be the first link down in the description. But if you don't want to talk to me, which I do understand, you can get my programs at the second link down below. My Athletic Ankles program, my 4-phase program that includes my bodyweight ankles program that you need no equipment for, as well as the 4 phases after that if you do have equipment we can run through, and plenty more down there below. So if you do have any other ideas or things that you want me to cover in videos, drop them down below. Like, subscribe, comment, all the other stuff, and I will see you guys next time.